And I don't know, man. I look around the world right now and I think, where are the adults,
Hmm.
right? Where are the adults who think more about tomorrow than today, right? And a lot of the technocrats that we have and the boy geniuses now getting longer in the tooth, they're not thinking more about tomorrow than today. There's this sort of personality gun show going on of you know, just narcissism and all of this. So, to the degree that the first two Alien movies are about this nameless, faceless whale and Yutani Corporation, I was like, well, if I do nameless, faceless, I'm not reflecting the corporate moment we're in, which is celebrity CEO moment, right? And so that's where the Boy Cavalier idea came from.
Welcome to Third and Fairfax, the official podcast of the Writers Guild of America West. I'm your host, Brian Gary. In our latest episode, I get to speak with creator, showrunner, writer, and director Noah Hawley about bringing the popular sci-fi horror Alien franchise to TV for his hit FX series, Alien Earth. We also talk about world building, the creative process, and a whole lot more. Listen and subscribe to Third and Fairfax on Spotify, Apple, or Libsyn, and watch us on the Writers Guild of America West's YouTube channel. And now, here's my conversation with Noah. Welcome back to Third and Fairfax, the official podcast of the Writers Guild of America West. I'm your host, Brian Gary, and today I have the distinct pleasure of sitting with Noah Hawley, writer, director, showrunner, right now currently of Alien Earth, but of many things. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
So we're obviously going to talk a lot about Alien Earth, but I want to step back and go a little bit macro first with you, and then we'll dive in to some more specifics. I'm going to throw out three names.
Okay.
We've got Legion, we've got Fargo, and now Alien Earth. Three massive franchises that you are stepping into to participate, to create, to collaborate inside of these worlds. I'm curious what draws you to everything from the minds of the Coen brothers to the Marvel Cinematic Universe to now this massive Alien franchise. What is it about stepping into these large worlds that you are drawn to? What are the perils? What are the pitfalls? And how do you find your own voice inside of something that exists already?
Well, it's always theme and character. Is there a story there that feels deep enough and compelling enough? Obviously, entertainment is a critical component of it, but I always felt like if you entertain an audience, they give you permission to do more with theme and character. The thing about those three franchises is that they're so different, stylistically, tonally. It wasn't lost on me that I metaphorically got on a plane in Calgary leaving Fargo 5 and got off a plane in Bangkok to shoot Alien Season 1. And I thought, well, who gets to do this? Who gets to make Fargo and Alien? But it's only, I think, because I approach each one as it is and not as I am, if that makes sense. It's if you're making Alien into Fargo, you're doing it wrong, right? So a lot of it is about the interpretation of the underlying material. Legion was more of an abstract exercise in that I had read X-Men comic books when I was young, but that character wasn't really familiar to me, and I kind of backed my way into who the show should be about, which we could talk about. On some level, it's I want to reach the biggest audience that I can. I think most writers do, most filmmakers do. This combination of existing IP and original storytelling, there's no guarantee that if you do Fargo based on the Coen Brothers movie or X-Men comics or Alien, that you're going to be known as an original storyteller, but it feels like a bit of a hat trick that's in the same sentence as the underlying IP as the originality of the material. So, yeah, it's a question of is there enough there to do over a long period of time and to really make something that's cinematically unique as well.
let's before we jump into then Alien Earth, let's look at Fargo and Legion. So in Fargo, you are taking, we'll call it the superstructure, the scaffolding of the tone, so much the world, but also the tone of what the Coen brothers were doing. And then you told distinct stories. And then inside of Legion, so you've got some plot and then obviously characters as television. But inside of Legion, you really are exploring this singular character.
Yeah.
So kind of compare and contrast those two, workflows for you.
Well, I mean, some of it, what the Coen brothers allowed me, and I don't mean they personally allowed me, but under the auspices of making a Coen brothers movie, I could say to FX, it's not that I want a 10-minute parable sequence, but it is a Coen brothers movie. So because of the volume of their experimentation as a filmmaker, I was allowed to push the boundaries in homage, right? So
They gave you some top cover.
yeah, and so once that succeeds, once you show that you can innovate within the dramatic form, then you become known for that, and then it becomes easier in a show like Legion to say, well, if you have a story about a main character who doesn't know what's real and what's not real, then that should be the audience's experience of the show, right? Because I do feel like the structure of a story should reflect the content of the story, and we can talk about that, but my first question is always, what am I taking for granted, right? And you have the story you're telling, and then there's the way you're telling it, and people often take that for granted. They often think you start in the beginning, you go to the middle, and you go to the end, and for me, I thought, well, here's this guy, he may have these powers, he may just be mentally ill. When we meet him, he doesn't know, we don't know, but then over time, as he learns the truth, we also learn the truth, and so that forced me into a place where the writer hands off to the filmmaker, because there was nothing in the script of Legion where it said it's going to look like Cool Britannia 1965 or whatever, but there was something in the development of it and the inspirations from my youth, of the things that I had watched growing up, and that sense of taking the story out of time, or even the time period of it, this might all be a delusion for him. All of that sort of fed into the cinema of it.
So obviously a writer, showrunner, which encompasses the writing, the producing, as you said, the vision of the show. You've added directing in as well, your director on your projects. So let's talk about your process.
Yeah.
Since you're wearing all of these different hats to not only develop but to produce and then to manifest these shows, how do you approach? Pick one, pick an episode, pick a season of Fargo, for example. Like, how do you sit down and where do you start? Like, what is your anchor? Like for Richard Burton, what was his process? A gin and tonic, and
Right.
For Olivier, it was I start from the outside. I need the costume.
Right.
So
Yeah.
how do you begin your process?
I mean, it usually starts with a question or an image, I guess. I think for Fargo season 1, I had this image of two men who meet in the emergency room of a hospital, and one is a very civilized man and the other is the opposite. And I thought, well, so who are these guys and what happens next? Season 2 was a woman drives home with a man sticking out of the windshield of her car and makes dinner for her husband. Or season 4, these two rival crime families trade their youngest sons. I mean, I don't know where these images come from, but they pop into my head, and they're a starting place. And then thematically, I mean, you look at Alien. When I look at Alien, what I see is this moment in the first film in which Sigourney leans back in her chair, and you see Ian Holm there, and you realize that Ian Holm is an android, and you realize that
There's a perfectly good explanation for this.
yeah, and you realize that Sigourney, as the emblem of humanity, is trapped between nature, right, the creature that is chasing her, and technology, and they're both trying to kill her. And I thought,
And triangulated, you got Mother.
yeah,
Crew is expendable.
Right.
There's a good explanation for all this.
but all of that feels,
Yeah.
emblematic of a moment that we're having. I mean, nature is now turning on us in a climate change environment, and the technology that we're creating without really asking the should we question, you know, those dangers are very present in our current moment. And so that's what made that show feel relevant and urgent to do right now. If it had just been a monster movie, I don't think there would have been enough there.
Let's pivot to Alien. And since you brought up monster, let's talk about monsters for a moment and how you make them relevant. The Geiger material that becomes the Geiger monster, the alien, the xenomorph, is so kind of laden into psychology, pop psychology, and into the psychology of the audience. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
What is it about monsters, actual monsters or metaphorical monsters, that really work so well dramaturgically inside of a film? You can bring them into a television show, and then the world of monsters you've expanded down to Octopus Eye, which is probably one of the most terrifying things.
Yeah. Wait till you see episode 4. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, monster is a word that represents so many things, including humanity. And they say you're only as good as your villain, right? What I found certainly in over the years is that the danger of monsters is they're often people's favorite characters, right? And especially in a Fargo tone of voice, your Billy Bobs or David Thewlis or Bokeem Woodbine or John Hamm, like these characters are often much more likable than they should be, right? Because audiences, what villains do is that they don't follow rules, right? They make things happen. They're often they break norms, and people respond to that, as I think we've witnessed in the last 10 years in our society, is that people like someone who doesn't follow the rules because they don't want to follow the rules either. When it comes to the monsters itself in the Alien universe, I think the genius of the Dan O'Bannon script and that monster is that it's really 4 monsters, right? It's the Neg, it's a face hugger, it's a chest burster, it's a xenomorph, and now it's 10 feet tall. And so at each step of the way, it just feels like it gets worse, right? And so there's something really, the discovery of that process for the audience seeing it the first time, I think it's what gave the movie its power. If it had just been a bear, right? Eventually you go, oh, it's a bear, right? But because it kept changing and it started off with this sort of like suffocating, penetrative act of, wrapping itself around your face, and then something bursts out of you. It's you can't distance yourself from it. It's not like running from a lion. The lion's inside of you at a certain point. And I think, we're so, after millions of years of evolution, there's this genetic revulsion that we have about things that crawl on us when we sleep or go into our eyes or our ears, or those ER room stories about the bug in the ear. All that stuff is really it's not an intellectual process that we have when we see those things. And so the key for me is, in inventing these new creatures, was to figure out what taps into those feelings, that aren't rational, and then try to recreate that discovery process. Wait, how does it eat? What is it? How does it breed? And get you to that point where, like, every discovery you make is worse and worse.
There's a delicate balance between, body horror and the Cronenberg. I mean, you have one episode called The Fly.
Yeah.
My sense is a little bit of a nod, to Cronenberg and that type of body horror. And then there is, gore, and then there's torture porn. Like there's a spectrum of it. You guys write a wonderful balance of body horror that is very visceral.
Yeah.
But it's all coming out of character. Like there's always, even the monsters, you're beginning. We can talk about the whole relationship that Wendy starts to have because she's actually speaking the language, and then interesting as a writer,
Yeah.
what the bridge of language does when you can actually communicate.
Yeah.
Do you remove it from being a monster at that point? So I'm just, now I'm talking to the showrunner and the director as much as the writer, because you're balancing some really intense, gory sequences, but they're all thematic and
Yeah.
they all come out of character and moments. So how do you balance that?
I mean, it's the difference. It's long form storytelling, right? Which is what limited or recurring series are. It's an alien movie is a 2-hour survival story. The monster, you certainly the xenomorph has more depth than most monsters, but it's still at the end of the day, your last hour is running, right, and fighting, and a recurring series can have some running and fighting, but that can't be what drives it, right? So the monsters. So then the first thing that I do is I go, all right, well, let's take the monster out of the story. What's the story? Because even if we have 60% of the best action horror around, you still have 40% of what are we talking about? What's the show about? And so once this idea of humanity trapped between nature and technology came in, and this transhumanism idea and this Peter Pan and now all that stuff came in, the way the world runs, the corporations, not politics, all that felt like, well, even if there were no monsters, it would be a really interesting show. And so now let's put the monsters back in. How can we use them thematically to raise the stakes and and the other element of it for me that is present in Ridley's movie and James Cameron's movie is a sort of moral horror, right? Because anytime you're looking at
Burke, that's a monster.
Yeah, anytime you're looking at a human survival story, I mean, it's like a zombie. In a zombie movie, the real enemy is always other people, right? It's rarely is it the zombies. It's the things that we do to each other when we should be helping. And so, and then you put into the context of that the fact that your heroes are children, who are looking around the world going, well, how should I be a person in this world, right? And there's a lot of bad role models in our world right now, right, about how to be a person. And so if humanity for them is now a choice, the show becomes a push-pull between human and other. And I thought that, and of course there's 5 of these kids and they're each going through a very different moral quandary, between Nibs, who is clearly having a kind of mental breakdown, because
PTSD from
she can't, and she can't really wrap her mind around the fact that she's not human anymore on the inside. There's this sense of what is she, and obviously Slightly has been asked to make this horrific choice about how to smuggle a monster out and choose a person. There are these awful things that are asked of these kids. It would be awful if they were asked of adults, and so that sense of dread that you need to build in a horror movie are there. They're just there in a more complex way, I think.
One more macro question, then I've got several kind of character, kind of deep dive slice into into the piece. So we had Bruce Miller on in the first season of Handmaid's Tale.
Right.
And, if you talk to Bruce and you kind of know the saga that it took to get Handmaid's Tale. And I know you went through a similar saga. But that all compresses in the rear view. And so everyone's, Bruce is handling things that, people are commenting, wow, how did you know that you're going to bring out a show that's going to intersect with the Trump administration?
Right. Yeah.
Like, it was so amazing. And he's like, well, it had 10 years to get here. But so, yes, you brought up the fact that Alien Earth hits square on artificial intelligence. That is very topical now. And also the climates or technology or climate. And I know that there's a serendipity to how these things line up and how you actually land the show. However, there's something that's actually, I think, equally interesting that I'd like to know your thoughts on, which is on the surface, we have these gleaming cities. They're beautiful. And the island in which the boy genius is operating, it's beautiful and everything seems to work and it's kind of organic a bit. And it's not that dystopian, sterile future. Everything feels very lived in and real. Again, the alien movies.
Yeah.
However, you do something really interesting, and it's like, no, this is dystopian. It's like, again, Margaret Atwood, The Oryx and Crake, which is what happens when corporations take over. And Hermit even says, well, we had people elected, and then it didn't work, and so now we have these corporations.
Yeah.
But then you have this scene or several scenes where a person is, in essence, de-citizenized, if you will. They are fired without recourse.
Yeah.
And it's self-deport or you'll be shot for trespassing.
Right.
So what it's like to actually be a citizen when you're really an employee, and what that future's like, and that kind of undercurrent, that insidious dystopia of this world. So I'm kind of curious how you are building this new environment for these characters to live in, because it feels, again, very lived in.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that is just one decision after another on some level, and follow the idea to its natural conclusion. And I just tried to think one or two steps ahead. Is it realistic to think that billionaires will become trillionaires, or that corporations will amass more power, and that as the dysfunction of politics continues to break down, that power may get handed off to someone or something.
Everything is privatized.
Yeah, in a way that may feel to people more efficient, et cetera. But we're also fighting entropy in the show, and even the trillionaire on his island, everything's moldy because the planet is hotter and wetter, and there's a constant battle against those forces. And so there is no gleaming Apple Store Star Trek future. It is the world of Alien, where everything's rusting and dripping, et cetera. I had this concept that didn't really visually come through in the first hour, just because there's just so much to do. But I had this concept of humanity plus and humanity minus and humanity prime, right? And that, as you go up into the higher floors, you get to this humanity plus. These citizens have more rights, more access. As you go down below ground, you get into humanity minus. These people, from a consumer standpoint, have less buying power, are less, respected, et cetera. And so that stuff was in there, but at a certain point, you got to sacrifice the cleverness, right, for the feeling and for the story, and that's not to say that it couldn't come back in a future season, but
hear that, Fox? We got all kinds of roadmap for multiple seasons of Alien Earth.
Yeah, but what you want to have is a complete world, and you want to be able to answer a production designer's question, and you want to be able to answer a fan's question. And sometimes it's not a question you've thought about until they ask it, but you need to be prepared. I mean, that's what the director or the showrunner's job is. You just make decisions, right? It's blue shirt, red shirt, should this be brick or, whatever. And you just make one decision after another. It's not a great job for indecisive people.
Let's talk about some characters. We're going to get into the hybrids and the cyborgs because, in fact, you begin the pilot with a card. It pretty much establishes, audience, this is what it's going to be about.
Yeah.
We're going to get to the monsters and aliens, but we're really going to explore these levels, this transhumanism, this, what it means to be human, as humans are evolving. So you brought up that amazing scene in the Alien film where Ripley first discovers what Ash is. And so I want to kind of look at a lineage. So you've got Ash, Ian Holm, and then you've got Lance Henriksen and Bishop.
Yeah.
And then you jump ahead, you've got in Prometheus and in Covenant, you've got Fassbender doing both David and Walter.
Right.
Now you've got Kirsch. And I would say one of Timothy Oliphant's great performances. I mean, it's so nuanced. And that's what I find fascinating when I dive in with you is that you've got these synthetic humans who are matched with great actors who are bringing such nuanced humanity to these characters. And Kirsch is fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I think so too. And, I worked with Tim on season 4 of Fargo. And so that was 2019, 2020. And that's how long Alien has been in development, that I said, I think I have something for you on this show. And I don't know what the instinct was. I mean, part of it may be between Ian Holm and Fassbender that the synthetics in Alien tend to be so British,
Mm.
and I like the energy of this quintessentially American actor. And also the fact that he is such a charming, charismatic guy, and sometimes it's interesting to work against that. Like he's still handsome, he's still charming, he's still whatever, but there's an affect on top of it that makes it more subtle, and as the season went on, the mystery of Kirsch deepened. What is he doing? What is the agenda there? And we reveal that there's a means to an end, but even then, I don't know that we feel necessarily like we have all the answers to what's really motivating him. And Tim is such a he's such an easy actor. He doesn't raise a ton of questions. He's a firm believer in showing up on the day, saying the lines. He doesn't romanticize the whole thing. I think he's a little self-deprecating on that level, but it does mean that I can talk to him both about the interior state of the character, but also like how the affect is reading, right? Actors don't usually like an effect comment to say, well, you look this way when you're doing that, right? But Tim wants to know, and he'll say, well, what are you really looking for here? And I can tell him, but otherwise he's like, so look here and talk to him. John Hamm's sort of the same way. These journeymen TV stars who, they don't overcomplicate it.
Show up on the day, hit your mark.
Yeah, and if the writing is good and the cinematography is good and the actor is well cast, etc., it shouldn't have to be more complicated than that.
So as we expand the world into what in essence are new characters into this universe, the hybrids. I mean, technically Morrow and the cyborgs, would be as well. But let's start. I mean, you could start with Morrow if you wanted to, because that's another fascinating character. But the boy genius and the lost children, and the lost boys, where did that come from for you? Because obviously, once you bring in the Peter Pan analogy, and the boy genius even says a couple of times, that it's the childlike. We did it because you're children. Your brains could handle it, and in many ways, his genius is slipping because he's getting older, and like he's petrified of that, and so he's literally trying to Peter Pan himself.
Yeah,
and all that affect of the way he dresses and his behavior and everything. So I'm just curious about the evolution, because I don't think you can talk about the hybrids without the boy genius as well, because of the world that he has brought them into.
I mean, Peter Pan, if you read the book, it's a super dark book. It's very anti-adult. It's, there are these lines in there about how Peter brings these children to this island, and when they start to grow up, he gets rid of them. And you're like, well, what does that mean? He gets rid of them, right? There's something really dark there. And, I have a 12-year-old and a 17-year-old, and since they've been born, I feel like everything I write is really about how we're raising our children and what world we're providing for them. And when you put these children's minds in adult bodies, you're saying, well, now you're adults, but we know that that's not true. We know there's a process to growing up, right? And that they're also looking for their role models. And I don't know, man. I look around the world right now and I think, where are the adults, right? Where are the adults who think more about tomorrow than today, right? And a lot of the technocrats that we have, and the boy geniuses now getting longer in the tooth, they're not thinking more about tomorrow than today. There's this sort of personality gun show going on of just narcissism and all of this. So, to the degree that the first two Alien movies are about this nameless, faceless Weyland-Yutani corporation, I was like, well, if I do Nameless, Faceless, I'm not reflecting the corporate moment we're in, which is celebrity CEO moment, right? And so that's where the Boy Cavalier idea came from. And it is this,
literally in his name, Cavalier. I mean,
yeah,
that's some delicious stuff.
You just you can't over worry these things. Yeah. It's whether it's his literal name or the name he's given himself, it's it's they're all symbols on some level as well, and I don't know, there's a whole thing about where Wendy's brother is trying to explain to her that the world is complicated, right? And this is something we say to our kids when we drive around and you have young kids and they're like, well, why are people allowed to live on the streets? And you're like, well, it's complicated. You just have to get used to it, right? We couldn't solve it. You just have to get used to it. And kids are like, no, I think we could probably solve it if we really put our minds to it. And adults go, yeah, but what we found in this world is you can't actually get people to put their minds to it, et cetera. And so having these children at the heart of this moral universe really allowed them to have a simpler moral outlook in which they, what Wendy says is it's complicated is what powerless people say to make doing nothing okay, right?
Well, let's talk about Wendy. Because in the books, Wendy is one of the few people who truly, take Captain Hook out of it, challenges Peter.
Yeah.
Because while she enjoys her time in Neverland, she does want to grow up. She does want to become an adult. She does want to have a family.
Yeah.
And you see that in Marcy Wendy, in which, she is now in this opportunity, not in this body, but the mind that's been given, or the vessel in which her consciousness is now operating, is an exponential of what it was before. And she wants to embrace that, but she still has the wonder of a child. So there's an interesting tension in that character, especially as, she begins to really push the boundaries. And you started very early where she's hacking into systems. And so when she does the thing with the language, it just doesn't come out of nowhere.
Right.
You do a nice job of seeding that to her, but she is different. She is different.
Yeah, and look, my daughter became a vegetarian when she was 9, right? She had a principle there, nothing with a face, et cetera, and it's a very noble thing. And on some level, Wendy has a similar thing. When these creatures come into this world, they didn't ask to be here. She's the causative and the correlative, right? She can hear them, and so she thinks they're talking to her. Well, they're not really talking to her. They're just talking and she can hear them, but she's projecting this thing on them where she now feels a sense of obligation to try to take care of them. And if they're just animals, maybe she can make them tame versus wild, et cetera. And it's a lot of hubris, but it's child's hubris on some level. But how different is it than Boy Cavalier going, yeah, we could bring all these monsters here and nothing bad is going to happen, So the thing with Wendy is that Peter brought her in to be a mother to these boys. She was asked to be the adult, really, in the story, and but as Wendy says, at a certain point, some version of, we're not children anymore, but we're not allowed to be adults either, because of course what they really are is a product. They're an immortality product, so they don't have autonomy. So how can they be fully adults if they can't make their own decisions?
Yeah. You directed some of the episodes. One I want to focus on is the one where we go back, and it's the voyage of the ship.
Yeah.
Post the gathering is where the ship goes from a ship and there's some sabotage and it becomes a missile, then it becomes an arrow. And
right.
And why did you choose, one, to go back to give us that flashback of that journey? Because I want to commend you. The characters in there, while we get a brief glimpse of them in the pilot, we know what happens to them, but when we go back, you still give enough character development to even the members of the crew that there's enough opportunity to begin to care. So well done with that.
Thank you.
But I'm also curious as to why you decided to go back and tell that part of the story.
There's a couple of reasons. One, I do think in long-form storytelling, you have this unique opportunity to tell the parts of the story that wouldn't fit into the movie, right? The 2-hour movie. And that as a ensemble storyteller, as someone who believes that the more point of views that you bring into a story, the deeper and richer it gets, it felt like an important element of it, right? We could yada, ship full of things and it crashes, and we probably would have had a great season without it, but there was something to going back in time, to making Morrow now the main character, versus a kind of villain in it to build some empathy for him, and to give us a preview on some level of what these creatures could do, so that when you go into episode 6, now you have a sense of danger that you might not have had beforehand. And there may have been something in me where I thought, well, yes, I'm going to try to innovate within Alien, with the rest of the episodes, but I also want to pick up the gauntlet and say I could do classic Alien also, right? And that's why at the end of the day, when I wrote it, I had to direct it, because who was I going to hand that opportunity off? And a lot of it is world building, right? As you mentioned, it's I have found, and I've worked with so many great episodic directors, but I have also worked with a lot of directors who, if a character doesn't have a line, they might as well not exist, right? But for me, it's I like to write characters who don't speak a lot. In many cases, the Kitchen brothers from season 2 of Fargo, or Andy Yu, who's in Alien. He played this character Mimo in season 3. I think he had like 4 lines the whole thing, but they hold so much space. They have to be compelling, etc. And I knew that if I was going to give you an episode devoted to this crew had to be real to you. They had to be idiosyncratic. They had to be, from the very first frames, you had to feel the reality of them, so that you could invest in whatever it is, 52 minutes, into feeling like you've gone on a whole emotional journey.
So let's talk about Morrow then, because we get glimpses of him, but he's definitely activated with a very, very clear purpose in the first few episodes.
Yeah.
Taking us back, we kind of see what sets all that in motion. So it kind of broadens the context of that character for us. So as you're building this, again, he's not a synthetic. He's not one of the hybrids. He's something else. And he has the advantage of being one of the only ones so far we've seen in this world who is that type of character, that type of evolved human. Let's talk a little bit about the crafting, the building of this character, because it's again, wonderfully different than Kirsch, wonderfully different than the hybrids.
Yeah.
And his discovery of all these different people is wonderful too, because we really see an actor and a character figuring it out as he's going along.
Yeah. Well, and Babu Sise, who plays Morrow, is such a tremendous presence and actor. And I did, at the end of filming that hour with him, I did pull him aside and I said, this show's going to wrap and you're going to go back to Gambia where you live with your family. And after about 4 weeks, you're going to start to wonder if this thing really ever happened, right? And it's going to be about a year before the show comes out. And you're going to start to doubt that it's a meaningful, that it's going to mean anything. And I said, I'm here to tell you that when the show comes out, you're going to have a huge bump off this, because I really believe that he's the one to beat. There's so many killers in the show, but he really steals every scene that he's in. And so it was great. It was another reason to write to his strengths was, this guy's a hero. I want to see him on the screen, even if he plays on the villainous side of it. There's something about the relationship of time in Alien that isn't often remarked on, but
he deals with it palpably.
Yeah, I mean, think about, Sigourney Weaver. They all wake up at the beginning of the first movie. They're awake for, 2 weeks or something? Mm-hmm. She flees. She goes into cryo sleep. She's asleep for 57 years, right? She wakes up. What are the events of the second movie? A year at the most? Mm-hmm. She's asleep for like 80 years in the course of that story, right? And so there was a sense of Morrow, what they sacrificed by being gone for that long, and the idea that this is his life's work, because literally it's 65 years of his life and everyone he knows is dead. And, I wanted to carry that sort of feeling of that through him.
One of the hardest things to do is personify the non-human characters. Even the alien that begins in the first movie, singular, to aliens, there's a ton of them. And most people kind of think, like Dracula, it evolves over time. And if you go back and watch the first movie, it moves really slowly and it kind of lurks around. And then by, Alien 3, they're like climbing on the walls and bolting,
Yeah.
and you have a very kinetic version of the alien as well. So personifying that is one thing, but to actually create a personality, and I have said it now, I think 3 times, octopus eye.
Yeah.
I mean, that, and when it's in the other creatures, it's kind of like it's a symbiote type environment. You've developed a personality.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do in CGI, because you're dealing with something practical on the set, but you're also saying, okay, this is what it's going to be like. I mean,
Right.
the famous, Spielberg, there's a tennis ball here, and he's
Right.
like, it's a dinosaur, and he's going rawr, rawr, and you
Yeah.
have to act to that tennis ball. So you've created a world, but I'm also curious how, when you were crafting these inanimate objects,
Yeah.
these digital versions of these creatures, how were you so careful to create a personality in them?
Well, it's an interesting process. Everyone does it differently. I had some creature design experience on Legion, in a couple of instances. And, when you think about horror, right? Comedy and horror are the same. There's a reason that both Zach and Jordan Peele have become great horror filmmakers, right? Because comedy is tension release, and horror, and if you go back and look at Key and Peele, there's so much horror in those sketches, right? And and I know also from the Coen brothers, right? From No Country for Old Men, where Anton Chigurh has that haircut,
Yeah.
right? It's ridiculous, but it's not comedy in the movie. It's just a really unsettling detail. And so when I approach this stuff, and they ask me, pointy teeth or flat teeth, I'll always go with flat teeth, because that's so much worse. First of all, the xenomorph has a human smile now. And second of all, that's going to hurt so much worse than the pointy teeth, right? And, we had this Minotaur in Legion, and they're always such symbols of virility, right? And masculinity, etc. And I was like, well, but that's not interesting to me. What's interesting is, what if we put him in like a doggy wheelchair? Like he's an emaciated and wasting away, and he's kind of dragging himself around, and that's unsettling because you're working against the symbol of it, right? And here, like with the fly, I live in Austin, and we got crickets, we got June bugs, we have a lot of these creatures who are terrible flyers, like they're palmetto bugs. They're not going in a straight line, right? And so the thing with a cricket is, especially for my wife who has long hair, she's always going to end up with these bugs in her hair and everything. And so there was something for me, like with the fly, for example, of, well, what if he's a sort of drunken flyer, where it's not this, shoot to kill straight line thing. There's something, and it's weird, right? Why would you design him to be that way? And I think the moment that you can be specific, the eye is a good example, right? The tentacles, obviously, that are practical. It moves itself around. It also has to burrow into your brain. The number of pupils, and then how you use them to both be one pupil, and then they can break apart, and then they can kind of all look in one direction.
There's an intelligence there to it.
Yeah, and so it's those moments of walking right up to almost to a comedy line in a way that adds specificity that that's always better, as I'm sure everyone who sits in this chair says. I mean, specificity is always better.
So let's talk about some practical things for you as a showrunner, and you're bringing on team members to collaborate. You're working with other writers. You're very clear on your voice and your process, and you're either calling on people that or you're getting samples, and you're looking. If you're being introduced to a writer in some way, what are you looking for in their choices, in their specificity, how they manifest their voice? Because all these choices that you're talking about, how if you're saying the key to the job is decisions, and you're looking to bring on collaborators with you, how do you see decisions being made, in other people's work?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different components to this. It's a sort of larger conversation. I was a staff writer on one show. I was a staff writer on Bones, and the best thing that Hart Hanson ever said to me was that I was a pleasure to rewrite, right? Because that's my job as a staff writer, is to give you, the showrunner, the best version of the script that I can, that works structurally, right? That is well thought through on a character level. But it's your show, it's your voice. You're going to rewrite me.
Mhm.
I don't know of a lot of instances where writers' scripts make it to the screen untouched. And on some level, for me, because I'm also the director and I'm in the editing room, on some level, if I don't write the joke, I don't know where the joke is. You know what I mean? So, and there's a voice thing, and there's what's said and what's unsaid, and the cinema of it, etc. What I look for is, what's your brain like, right? How do you think about story? Are you plot driven? Are you character driven? Do you think about theme? Do you ask questions about the world, or are you just driven by, I had one writer on a show, everything was sort of soap to him, and it was like, I had this concept with Legion where, I need to flesh out the cast. And I was like, but how many characters am I going to have? What if I had two characters who were in the same body, right? I've got Bill Irwin's character, and then Amber Midthunder comes out. Why? I don't know. Why? Because sometimes I need someone who fights, and sometimes I need someone who thinks. And what if I could put them in the same body, because it's Legion, right? And, and then this writer was like, well, and then maybe she's having there's a love triangle with that. I was like, there's no love triangle. That's not interesting to me, right?
Yeah.
So, you kind of got to cast your room in the right way, that people have think about story in the same way. I mean, look, Alien was tough because there's a lot of Alien movies. There's that, and
A lot of expectation.
yeah, and of course people are going to go, well, I've got a great Alien story that plays out like one of those Alien movies, and I'm thinking, well, right, but I'm trying to do something different with it. So you being well versed in the Alien lore might not be the best thing on this show, right? And then, yeah, how are you in the
canon
room?
police.
Yeah. How are you in the room? How are you thinking about horror? A writer's room is a collection of people with very different brains, and the only common language they speak is plot. And so what you tend to have in a writer's room is this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and that's not really how I think about story. And so, I'm trying to build a room in which we have a more 360 look at it, where it's like, well, don't worry about what happens next so much, especially on a show like Fargo, where you're just as likely to get hit by a truck. You know what I mean? Because of that true story element of it. Don't worry about what the movie twist is. What's going to happen on this show?
So right now you're in it. You're in the machine. You're marketing. You're presenting this show to the world. It's a bit of the gauntlet. But have you begun to think, like, what's next for Alien Earth? What's next, for Noah Hawley after that? Like, how do you balance, the this part of the job with your creative process, which, going back to the very beginning of the interview, you said sometimes just as an image pops up. Have you started getting some images floating up from the subconscious, that deep lake?
Yeah, I have. I mean, endings are what give story meaning, right? So if you don't know where you're going, how do you know what it means, what you're doing? And so I'm not saying I have the end of Alien Earth in mind, but I do have a sense of where we're headed. I don't know how long it'll take to get there, right? With Legion, it was the same. It ended up taking 3 seasons, but you don't know going into it. And on some level, I don't want to know too much because, the writing brain is a different brain than the outline brain. Outline is a list-making brain, and writing is a creative brain. And, it's one of the best things that I've managed to do at FX is, like, we don't do outlines anymore. That's not, we might do internally. Of course, we'll write stuff on the board and we'll work things out. And if you need an outline, great. But I don't want to work off of an outline because then when I get on the page, it's not even necessarily that different things are going to happen. It's just now I'm following the characters where they're going and the story where it's going. So I have thoughts. I know character wise. I know what the big questions are
Mm-hmm.
and how I want to go about answering them, which is the best place to be in, right? Because if you know everything, now you're just going through the motions.
Last question for you. So as you're looking at the what you can tell story wise in television, and you've got these plans. You did Lucy in the Sky, did a feature. Any other plans for that type of self-contained storytelling as well, especially that you would approach as a writer, director, the filmmaker to do the whole thing,
Yeah.
but self-contained?
Yeah, I'd love to make another movie, and I'm having those conversations.
Something from one of your books, maybe?
Yeah, potentially. It's a radically different business, right? I mean, TV. I understand why things get made in TV. The film world, I don't necessarily understand why they make things clearly, right? They don't have to. On some level, TV, there's a schedule, and you got to feed it. And the feature business, sometimes you feel like it's safer not to make choices than it is to make choices. So I definitely want to do another one. I have a joke, which is everybody loves what I do until I do it for them, right? Because I have my own process and way into it, and that's sort of
Love the idea of Noah Hawley.
Yeah, it's sort of what it was with Lucy in the Sky, where I started off with, Fox Searchlight brought me a script that was Reese Witherspoon. It was kind of an I, Tonya version about this tabloid story about this astronaut, and I was like, yeah, I'm not interested in that tone of voice. But then they came back to me with another draft that had introduced this psychological magic realism that I thought was interesting, and then I pushed on that and continued to develop it and made what I thought was, the best version of that story that I could tell. And I feel like when I delivered it to them, they're like, "Where's the Reese Witherspoon black comedy?" And I was like, "Well, it hasn't been a Reese Witherspoon black comedy for 3 years or whatever, but people get it into their heads what they think that you're making." And so, and again, the amount of money, right? How big's the budget? Now, I'm in the trust me business, as we said earlier. The more expensive it is, the harder it is to trust. And if you, I don't know, I feel like I tend to do a lot of things that shouldn't work or haven't worked before in mixing tone and mixing elements and points of view, etc. But they do work, but you just have to trust me that they're going to. The script is the best, worst blueprint for what it's going to feel like to watch something in the theater, to watch Sinners in the theater. What did that script tell you?
Yeah.
What, that there was going to be a montage in which you moved through the
Time,
thing?
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's so at a certain level, that's where the script fails in as a statement of ambition for a filmmaker, right? And so, I don't want to waste my time. I get paid very well, and I work very hard in TV, and so I'd love to do a film, but only if I can get it done the way that I want to get it done.
More books too?
Yeah, the book is a huge undertaking, and you can't jump in and out of it. It does require some immersion. I guess I would say it feels like Alien Earth is going to be a success, and in success, the key is not to step away for a year, and the key is to say, well, how can I use this success to tell more stories and to get more autonomy in the field. So, I think that's my goal is I'm not worried about my legacy at this point, but I'm not done either.
Noah, thank you for joining us here at Third and Fairfax. Thank you for joining us. We've been talking with Noah Hawley, writer, showrunner, director of Alien Earth, among many other things. You've been listening to us here or watching us on Third and Fairfax, the official podcast of the Writers Guild of America West. Make sure to subscribe on Spotify, Libsyn, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, anywhere where you can get your feed. And also subscribe to the Writers Guild of America West YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.